The morning of October 7th, 1571, arrives with an unsettling calm over the Gulf of Patras. The water lies smooth as glass, reflecting the pale dawn light. And then you see them. Hundreds of ships stretching across the horizon in two massive lines, close enough now that men on opposing decks can make out faces across the narrowing gap. The Ottoman fleet moves forward with the confidence of an empire that has terrorized these waters for half a century, their oars rising and falling in perfect rhythm, carrying the sacred banner that has never been lost in battle. On the Christian side, young commanders grip the rails of their flagships, watching 6 strange vessels being towed into position at the front of their line. Massive, ungainly things that Ottoman spies had dismissed weeks earlier as converted merchant ships, too slow to matter in a real fight. But those spies were catastrophically wrong, and in the next few hours those 6 ships are going to unleash more firepower than the Ottomans have ever faced at sea. This is the moment before everything changes. Stay with me, because what happens next will shatter the myth of Ottoman invincibility and mark the last great galley battle the Mediterranean will ever see. Dawn breaks over the Gulf of Patras on October 7th, 1571. The water lies calm, almost eerily so, reflecting the first pale light of morning. And then you see them. Ships. Hundreds of ships stretching across the horizon in 2 massive formations, each line extending for miles across the glassy surface of the Gulf. This is going to be the largest naval battle the Mediterranean has seen in over 1,000 years. On one side, the Ottoman fleet, roughly 250 warships, fresh from their brutal conquest of Cyprus, carrying the elite janissaries and battle-hardened sailors who've terrorized Christian coastlines for decades. Their commander, Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha, carries something precious in his flagship, the sacred banner of the caliphs, embroidered with the name of Allah written in gold letters 28,900 times. It has never been lost in battle. On the other side, the Christian Holy League. 212 ships, a hastily assembled coalition of Spain, Venice, and the Papal States that barely trusts each other. Outnumbered, outmatched by experience. Led by a 24-year-old commander in his first major naval engagement. But the Christians have something the Ottomans don't know about. 6 massive vessels positioned at the front of their fleet, broader and taller than any galley, bristling with cannons. Ottoman spies saw these strange ships weeks ago and reported back that they were nothing to worry about. Just converted merchant vessels, too slow to matter, probably just for show. They were catastrophically wrong. Those 6 galleasses are about to unleash more firepower in the opening minutes than the Ottomans have ever faced at sea. Each one carries the artillery of 5 regular warships, and in less than 5 hours they'll help shatter the myth of Ottoman naval invincibility that has terrified Europe for half a century. For the first time in decades, the seemingly unstoppable Turkish fleet is about to discover that superior numbers mean nothing against weapons you've never encountered before. This is the Battle of Lepanto, and the Ottomans never saw it coming. You have to understand what led to this moment, because this battle doesn't happen without Cyprus. The island of Cyprus, sitting in the eastern Mediterranean like a jewel surrounded by Ottoman territory. It belonged to Venice, but it was isolated, vulnerable, basically sitting in what the Venetians themselves called the wolf's mouth. In March 1570, an Ottoman envoy arrived in Venice with a simple message from Sultan Selim II. Surrender Cyprus immediately, or we take it by force. Venice refused. They hoped other Christian powers would come to their aid. They were wrong about the timing. On June 27, 1570, an Ottoman invasion fleet of 350 ships carrying somewhere between 60 and 100,000 soldiers set sail. They landed unopposed near Larnaca on July 3rd. The Venetian defenders made a calculated decision. Don't fight on the beaches where Ottoman artillery would annihilate them. Fall back to the fortified cities and wait for reinforcements. Those reinforcements never came in time. The capital, Nicosia, held out for 7 weeks. The Venetians had built new fortifications, thick earthen walls designed specifically to withstand artillery bombardment. 11 bastions arranged in a star pattern. For 45 days the defenders held. Then, on September 9th, 1570, after the 15th major assault, the walls finally gave way. What happened next was a massacre. 20,000 people slaughtered in a single day. The Ottomans killed everyone they could find, soldiers and civilians alike. They even killed the pigs because Muslims considered them unclean. Only women and boys young enough to sell as slaves were spared. One fortress remained, Famagusta, on the eastern coast. The Venetian commander there was Marco Antonio Bragadin, and he had about 8,500 men to defend against an Ottoman force that eventually swelled to over 200,000. For 11 months, Bragadin held out. 11 months of constant bombardment, of supplies running desperately low, of hope fading with each passing week as the promised Christian relief fleet failed to arrive. By August 1571, it was over. Bragadin's garrison was down to 900 men, most of them wounded, all of them starving. He negotiated surrender terms. The Ottomans agreed to let the defenders leave peacefully. Then they broke their word. The Ottoman commander, Lala Mustafa Pasha, had lost 50,000 men taking Famagusta. He wanted revenge. Bragadin's companions were executed. Bragadin himself was mutilated, his nose and ears cut off. They dragged him around the city walls with sacks of earth and stone on his back. Then they tied him naked to a column in the main square and flayed him alive. His skin was stuffed with straw and paraded through Cyprus before being sent to Constantinople as a trophy. That brutality echoed across Europe. It crystallized something. The Ottomans weren't just conquering territory anymore. They were sending a message about what happened to those who resisted. But building an alliance against them was like herding cats. Pope Pius V had been trying since 1566 to form a coalition. The Holy Roman Empire had just made peace with the Ottomans and didn't want to break it. France was traditionally friendly with the Turks and hostile to Spain anyway. Spain, the most powerful Christian nation in the Mediterranean, was dealing with revolts in the Netherlands and a nearly empty treasury. And Venice didn't trust Spanish intentions in Italy. The Pope pushed anyway. He had to. Because he understood something that many of his contemporaries didn't quite grasp. The Ottomans weren't going to stop at Cyprus. The entire Mediterranean was at stake. Finally, on May 25th, 1571, the Holy League was formed. Spain would provide the largest share of ships and money. Venice would contribute its naval expertise and galleys. The Papal States, Genoa, Savoy, and the Knights of Malta would add what they could. The treaty called for 200 galleys, 100 support vessels, and 50,000 men. Command went to Don John of Austria, 24 years old, the illegitimate son of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, raised in secrecy, only acknowledged by his half-brother, King Philip II of Spain, a dozen years earlier. He'd fought Moorish rebels in Granada, but this was something entirely different. Philip chose him partly because he was competent, partly because he was young enough not to threaten Philip's authority, and partly because he was one of the few commanders all the Allied powers could agree on. Don John arrived at Messina in Sicily on August 23, 1571, sailing his flagship, the Real. He'd spent the journey down the Italian coast, picking the brain of every experienced naval commander he could find, learning galley tactics from retired admirals. The Allied fleet gathering at Messina was impressive on paper. Spanish galleys that were brand new and heavily armed, Venetian galleys with experienced crews, papal galleys blessed by the Pope himself. But there were problems. The Spanish ships were undermanned. The Venetians and Spanish commanders barely spoke to each other. Different contingents wanted different things out of this campaign. And by the time everyone finally assembled in late August, Famagusta had already fallen. Cyprus was lost. Some voices argued they should just go home. What was the point now? Don John decided they'd find the Ottoman fleet and fight anyway. Not for Cyprus, that was gone, but to prove something, that the Turks could be beaten, that Christian naval power still mattered. On the Ottoman side, Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha was organizing his fleet at Lepanto, the fortified port on the Gulf of Corinth. He was young, too, not much older than Don John, and, like his counterpart, he was more of a land commander than a naval tactician. He'd commanded the fleet that invaded Cyprus, and he'd been present when Bragadin was flayed. Now Sultan Selim had given him the most sacred banner in the Ottoman arsenal, and essentially ordered him to destroy the Christian fleet if he encountered it. His advisors were split. Some, like the Corsair commander Ulugh Ali, urged caution. The Christians might actually have their act together this time. Others played up the idea that the Holy League was too divided to fight effectively, that they'd fall apart like they always did. Ali Pasha made his choice. If the Christians wanted a fight, he'd give them one. The stakes were clear to everyone involved. For Don John, this was about proving himself, about showing he deserved command, about protecting his half-brother's Mediterranean empire. For the Venetians, this was revenge for Cyprus and survival. If the Ottomans controlled the sea lanes, Venice was finished as a power. For the Ottomans, this was about maintaining dominance, about showing that their string of naval victories over the past decades wasn't a fluke. But beyond the personal and national stakes, there was something bigger. Would the Ottomans control the entire Mediterranean? Would they use that control to launch invasions of Italy, to threaten Rome itself? Or would Christian Europe finally draw a line? One thing we need to acknowledge here, the exact numbers from historical sources vary quite a bit. Ottoman records and Christian records don't always match up, and contemporary accounts sometimes exaggerated for dramatic effect. We're using the most reliable estimates historians have compiled, but you'll find slightly different numbers in different sources. What matters is the scale. This was going to be massive. By early October, both fleets were on the move. The Holy League sailed from Messina on September 16th, heading east. They reached Corfu by September 27th, having covered 240 miles in 10 days, which was actually pretty impressive for a fleet that size. At Corfu, they learned that Famagusta had fallen, and that the Turkish fleet was somewhere near Lepanto. The debate among Christian commanders got heated again. Some wanted to attack the Ottoman supply base. Others feared risking the entire fleet in a single engagement. Don John listened to all of them, then made his decision. They would sail to find the Turks and force a battle. On October 6th, the Ottoman fleet left Lepanto and moved about 10 miles west to Galata. Ali Pasha had gotten reports that the Christians were nearby. His fleet was larger than the League's, his men were experienced from the Cyprus campaign, and he was carrying a banner that had never been lost in battle. What he didn't fully understand was what those 6 strange ships at the front of the Christian line could do. The Gulf of Patras isn't a huge body of water. It's maybe 3 miles wide at the point where these two fleets are going to meet, opening up to the broader Ionian Sea to the west, narrowing as it approaches Lepanto to the east. The northern shore is relatively close, which matters because it limits manoeuvrability for the northern flank. The southern side opens to more water, which gives more room, but also more opportunity for a clever commander to try flanking manoeuvres. This geography is going to shape everything that happens. Neither fleet can hide. Neither fleet can surprise the other. Once they're in the Gulf together, everyone can see everyone else from miles away. The battle lines are going to stretch almost from shore to shore, which means there's no real way to avoid engagement once both sides commit. You can't retreat easily with hundreds of ships packed into a relatively narrow space. And if your northern flank gets pushed against the shore, you're trapped. The Christians understand this. So do the Ottomans. This is going to be a head-on collision. Now, let's talk about what these fleets actually look like. The Holy League has 206 galleys, plus those 6 galleasses. The galleys break down to about 105 Venetian, 81 Spanish, 12 Papal, and a handful from Genoa, Malta, and Savoy. Each galley is roughly 150 feet long, narrow, powered by oars. A typical galley has a crew of about 225 men. Some are sailors, but most are rowers, and many of those rowers are slaves or convicts. The galleys carry maybe 10 days of food and water, which means they can't stay at sea very long. For weapons, most galleys have a few cannon mounted at the bow, pointing forward. Maybe 1 or 2 heavy guns, a handful of lighter pieces. Some have small swivel guns mounted on the rails. The real fighting power, though, comes from the soldiers on board. Once galleys close with each other, the tactic is simple. Ram if you can, grapple with hooks to lock the ships together, then send your infantry across to fight hand-to-hand on the enemy deck. It's a land battle fought on floating platforms. The League has about 30,000 soldiers ready to do that boarding and fighting. They've got another 40,000 rowers and sailors. Total firepower across the fleet is something like 1,800 guns, though most of those are small. Then there are the galleasses. These are the secret weapon, and they're completely different from regular galleys. The Venetians built them in a rush in the months before the campaign, converting large merchant galleys into warships. Each galleass is massive compared to a standard galley. Broader beam, much higher sides, built like a floating fortress. They've got 3 or 4 masts with full sails, plus 25 to 30 oar banks per side. They need about 275 rowers each just to move. But here's what makes them special: firepower. Each galleass carries more than 40 heavy guns. Not little swivel guns, proper artillery pieces. Some are 30-pounders, some are 50-pounders. They've got cannon mounted at the bow in a fortified roundhouse, more cannon along the sides, cannon at the stern. A single galleass can fire about 325 pounds of shot in one salvo. That's the equivalent of 5 regular galleys. The Venetians built these with a continuous gun deck running over the rowers' heads, which means they can fire broadsides like a proper sailing warship, not just forward like a galley. The high wooden sides make them almost impossible to board. Arrows and musket fire mostly just bounce off. The gun deck protects the rowers, who stay below and relatively safe. There's a catch, though. These things are slow, really slow, unwieldy. They can't maneuver worth a damn, especially if the wind isn't cooperating. So the plan is to have regular galleys tow them into position before the battle starts. 2 galleys per galleass. Get them set up ahead of the main battle line and let them act as stationary artillery platforms. Ottoman spies had observed these ships weeks earlier when the League was assembling at Messina. One corsair captain even snuck a small boat painted black right up to the Christian fleet at night and counted ships. He saw the galleasses. He reported back that they didn't seem like a threat. Too big, too slow. Probably just converted merchant ships that wouldn't matter in a real fight. This is going to be a fatal miscalculation. The Ottoman fleet is larger. Estimates put them at somewhere between 230 and 250 galleys, plus about 56 smaller vessels called galleots. The galleots are like light galleys, half oar-powered and half sail, with a few small cannon. The Ottomans have about 37,000 soldiers, including 10,000 janissaries, the elite infantry of the Ottoman army, permanent professional soldiers who are absolutely fierce in close combat. They've got another 13,000 sailors and somewhere around 40 to 50,000 rowers. Total artillery is about 750 guns. On paper, the Ottomans have the advantage in numbers. But there are problems. The fleet has been at sea for months during the Cyprus campaign. The ships are worn down. Many are undermanned because casualties from the Cyprus fighting haven't been fully replaced. The Ottomans also have lighter cannon overall compared to the Spanish and Venetian heavy guns. And they're late in the campaign season. Everyone's exhausted. The quality of the infantry matters too. Spanish soldiers are known for incredible discipline and training. Don John had them running drills at Messina before the fleet sailed, practicing with their arquebuses, getting used to fighting in the confined spaces of a ship's deck. The Ottomans have the janissaries, who are excellent, but the rest of their troops are less consistently trained. Most Turkish soldiers still rely heavily on bows and swords. Some janissaries have muskets, but firearms aren't as widespread in the Ottoman forces as they are among the Spanish. Both sides are organizing their fleets in similar ways. 3 main divisions: a centre, a left wing and a right wing. Then a reserve force held back to reinforce wherever it's needed. For the Holy League, Don John commands the centre in his flagship, the Real. He's got the Venetian Admiral Sebastiano Venier with him, plus the commander of the Knights of Malta and the papal commander Marcantonio Colonna. The centre is the strongest part of the line, the most ships, the most firepower. The left wing, positioned toward the northern shore, goes to the Venetian commander Agostino Barbarigo. His ships are going to be closest to land, which is the most dangerous position because you can get trapped against the coast. The right wing, in the open water to the south, is commanded by the Genoese admiral Giovanni Andrea Doria. He's got about 50 galleys, a mix of Genoese, Venetian, Papal and Spanish ships. The reserve, about 30 galleys, is under the Spanish commander Álvaro de Bazan, the Marquis of Santa Cruz. His job is to stay mobile and plug gaps wherever the line gets threatened. And ahead of all 3 divisions, the 6 galleasses are being towed into position. 2 in front of the centre, 2 in front of the left wing, 2 in front of the right wing. The Ottoman formation mirrors this. Ali Pasha commands the centre in his flagship, the Sultana. He's got 87 galleys divided into 2 lines, the newest and best ships in front. The right wing, facing Barbarigo's Venetians, is under Mahomet Scirocco, who commands the Egyptian fleet. The left wing, facing Doria, goes to Uluk Ali, the Algerian corsair commander who had advised caution. He's got about 60 galleys and 30 galleots, and behind Ali Pasha's centre there's a reserve of 90 galleys in 3 separate lines. Don John makes one more tactical innovation that most people miss. He orders the rams removed from the bows of many Christian galleys. The ram is the traditional weapon for galley warfare. You build up speed and try to hold the enemy ship below the waterline. But removing the ram allows you to mount more forward-facing guns. Don John is betting on firepower over ramming. It's a gamble. The night of October 6th, the 2 fleets are close enough that both sides know battle is coming the next morning. There's no avoiding it now. On the Christian ships, you'd have seen soldiers checking their weapons, arquebusiers making sure their matchlocks are dry, that their powder is ready, swordsmen sharpening blades, officers moving between ships in small boats, making sure everyone understands the plan, priests hearing confessions, blessing the men, leading prayers. Some of the Spanish soldiers are probably joking around, trying to keep spirits up. The Venetians are grimmer. They've got personal scores to settle for Cyprus. Don John moves through the fleet in a small boat, visiting different galleys, talking to commanders, making sure everyone sees him calm and confident. He's 24 years old and about to command the largest Christian naval force assembled in decades. That's got to be terrifying, but he doesn't show it. On the Ottoman side, there's confidence. They've won battle after battle at sea for years. They've got larger numbers. They've got the sacred banner, which is being treated with special reverence. But some of the more experienced commanders are uneasy. Uluk Ali knows the Christians might actually be organised this time. The fleet is tired from the Cyprus campaign. And those strange large ships the scouts reported, what are those about? Ali Pasha decides that if the Christians want to fight, his fleet will attack. The Sultan has ordered him to engage if he encounters the enemy. Honour demands it. The banner demands it. Dawn on October 7th comes with clear skies. At 6 in the morning, the Christian fleet passes south through the strait between the island of Oxia and Mount Malcantone, entering the Gulf of Patras properly. Within an hour and a half, both fleets can see each other clearly across the water. There's no turning back now. The 2 largest naval forces in the Mediterranean are locked into a collision course. It takes 2 hours for them to close the distance. These massive formations of hundreds of ships, oars rising and falling in rhythm, moving slowly but inevitably toward each other across the calm water. By 9 in the morning, the Christian fleet is ready. The galleasses are in position, towed out ahead of the main line. The three divisions are formed up, lines stretching for miles. Every soldier is armed and in place. The Ottomans are ready too. Their line is actually longer than the Christian line, which means they overlap on both flanks. This should give them an advantage. They can try to wrap around the ends of the Christian formation. The distance continues to close. Half a mile, a quarter mile. This is going to be the largest naval battle since ancient times. 450 ships, 150,000 men, and 6 Venetian galleasses that are about to announce themselves in the most violent way possible. Noon, maybe a bit before. The galleasses fire first. The sound is enormous. 40 heavy guns from the lead galleasses opening up at once, and the Ottoman ships are still closing, packed relatively tight in their formation. The cannonballs tear through the Turkish galleys. You've got 50-pound shot moving at high velocity, and these Ottoman ships are built light for speed. The balls punch straight through the thin hulls. Splinters explode across the decks. Men are cut down before they even understand what's happening. The 2 galleasses in front of the Christian left wing score a direct hit with their third salvo. They catch a Turkish galley right at the bow, below the waterline. The ship just starts sinking immediately, going down in minutes. The galleass crews reload and fire again. And again. The rate of fire is slower than a regular galley because these are huge guns, but the impact is devastating. Each salvo from each galleass is putting out more metal than 5 regular ships combined. Smoke starts to roll across the water. Black powder smoke is thick and choking, and within minutes visibility starts to drop. But the galleasses keep firing. The Ottoman formation, which was tight and organized, starts to come apart. Ships are taking damage, rowing crews are getting killed, and the commanders realize they need to get around these floating fortresses because sailing straight at them is suicide. So the Ottoman line splits, ships angling to bypass the galleasses. But this disrupts their formation. The neat battle line becomes ragged. Ships bunch up in some places, spread out in others. The tight coordination they had planned on is already falling apart. Modern historians estimate that in those first 10 to 15 minutes, the galleasses damaged or disabled somewhere around 70 Ottoman ships. 70. Before the main fleets even properly engaged. The Ottomans have never faced anything like this. Their spies told them these ships didn't matter. They were catastrophically wrong. Then the main lines collide. The northern flank hits first. Barbarigo's Venetians against Scirocco's Egyptian fleet. The Ottomans are trying to use their superior numbers to outflank the Venetian left, to get around and attack from the side. Barbarigo sees it coming and angles his ships to block, but this pushes him closer to the shore. His leftmost ships are getting squeezed into a narrower and narrower space. The fighting is immediately brutal. These aren't long-range artillery duels. Galleys ram into each other, grappling hooks fly through the air, and then it's hand-to-hand combat, with swords and arquebuses at point-blank range. Barbarigo's flagship gets swarmed. He takes an arrow to the eye. He stays in command, even as he's bleeding, shouting orders, refusing to go below. The Venetian left is in trouble. They're pinned against the coast, with Egyptian galleys trying to overwhelm them through sheer numbers. Some Ottoman ships run aground in the shallow water. Some Venetian ships do too. Men are fighting on beached hulls, in the surf, on the rocks. It's chaos. But the Venetian galleys that hadn't quite made it into position before the battle started, they're coming up now, hitting the Egyptian flank. And Christian reserve ships from the centre are angling north to help. The tide starts to turn, slowly. The Egyptians are being ground down. Scirocco's ships are taking heavy casualties. Many Turkish crews start abandoning their ships, swimming for shore, trying to escape. In the centre, the two flagships are heading straight for each other. The Real and the Sultana. Don John and Ali Pasha. Everyone can see it happening. These aren't just any galleys. They're bigger, more heavily armed, carrying the commanders and their elite guards. The Sultana rams the Real. The bow of the Turkish flagship crashes into the Christian flagship with a splintering crunch of wood. Immediately, grappling hooks are thrown from both sides. Sailors haul on the ropes, pulling the ships together until they're locked hull to hull. The gap between the decks is maybe a few feet. Then the killing starts. Spanish arquebusiers on the Real fire volleys into the packed Turkish deck. The Ottomans fire back with muskets and arrows. Men are hit, falling, and then the boarding begins. Spanish and Italian soldiers try to cross onto the Sultana. Turkish janissaries and sailors meet them with swords and spears. The fighting is hand to hand, close enough to see each other's faces. Men are slipping on blood. The decks are packed so tight you can barely swing a sword. Other galleys from both sides see their commanders locked in combat and come rushing to help. Christian galleys ram into the melee from one side, Turkish galleys from the other. Ships are locking together in clusters, 4 or 5 at a time, becoming floating brawls. Reinforcements from both fleets keep arriving. This fight in the centre becomes the critical point of the whole battle. Ali Pasha is in the thick of it. He's up on the aft deck of the Sultana, directing the defence. Spanish soldiers make repeated attempts to board, and each time the janissaries drive them back. Bodies are piling up. An hour passes. Neither side is giving ground. Then a Spanish boarding party makes it across. They fight their way to the aft deck. Ali Pasha fires an arquebus at them. He's personally fighting now, not just commanding. He gets hit in the head, a musket ball that doesn't quite kill him, but drops him to the deck. He's bleeding badly. He tries to surrender, offers treasure, offers ransom. A Macedonian soldier in Venetian service shoots him again. Ali Pasha goes down. A Spanish soldier, in the confusion and bloodlust, hacks his head off. Someone mounts it on a pike. They raise it up on the prow of the Sultana, where everyone can see it. The psychological effect is immediate. Ottoman sailors on nearby ships see their admiral's severed head displayed like a trophy. They see the sacred banner of the caliphs being hauled down from the Sultana's mainmast, see it being transferred to the Real. That banner has never been captured before. Never. Turkish morale doesn't just crack, it collapses. The centre starts to come apart. Ships that were fighting hard suddenly try to pull away. Rowing crews lose coordination. Some ships just stop fighting entirely, the crews throwing down weapons or jumping into the water. But while the centre is imploding and the northern flank is grinding the Egyptians into the rocks, the southern flank is going very badly for the Christians. Giovanni Andrea Doria, commanding the right wing, has made a critical mistake. He moved his ships too far south, opening a gap between his division and Don John's centre. Maybe he was trying to prevent being outflanked. Maybe he was just overly cautious. Doria had been one of the voices arguing against this battle in the first place. Whatever the reason, there's now a dangerous gap in the Christian line. Uluç Ali sees it instantly. He's a corsair, a career naval commander, and he knows an opening when he sees one. He swings his Algerian squadron around Doria's wing and drives straight for that gap. His ships punch through and attack Don John's centre from the south, hitting ships that are already engaged with Turkish vessels from the front. The Knights of Malta bear the brunt of this attack. They're tough fighters, absolutely fearless, but they're getting swarmed from two directions at once. Casualties mount fast. Ships are taking damage. There's a real possibility that the Christian centre could get surrounded and destroyed, despite having just captured the Sultana. This is the critical moment. If Uluç Ali can exploit this breakthrough, if Doria doesn't come back to plug the gap, the whole Christian line could unravel. Álvaro de Bazan sees the danger. He commands the Christian reserve, and this is exactly what the reserve is for. He takes his 30 galleys and crashes them into Uluç Ali's flank, hitting the Algerians from the side. The impact blunts the Ottoman penetration. Ships that were pushing forward suddenly have to defend their flanks. The momentum stalls. Doria, realizing his error, finally brings his ships back. He closes the gap. The southern flank stabilizes. Uluç Ali knows when to quit. He's smart enough to see that Ali Pasha is dead, the centre is collapsing, and staying to fight is just going to get his ships destroyed. He cuts his way through a squadron of Maltese galleys. Fighting is fierce, but he breaks through, and manages to recapture 3 Ottoman vessels that had already been taken by the Christians. Then he runs. About 30 to 40 of his ships get away in good order, escaping north. Don John sees Uluç Ali escaping and has to make a decision. He could pursue. He might catch some of those ships. But the weather is changing. Storm clouds are building to the west. It's already late afternoon, approaching 4 o'clock. And the rest of the Ottoman fleet is completely destroyed. Pursuing Uluç Ali would mean scattering his own fleet right before a storm, and he'd probably only catch a handful of ships anyway. He lets him go. On the northern flank, the fight is over. Scirocco's Egyptian fleet is annihilated. Ships are beached, burning or sunk. The Venetians have taken brutal casualties. Barbarigo is dying from that arrow wound to the eye. But they've won. Ottoman sailors who made it to shore are being hunted down. There's no mercy. The Venetians remember Nicosia. They remember Famagusta. They remember Bragadin. This is revenge, and it's ugly. In the centre, resistance has completely collapsed after Ali Pasha's death. Turkish ships are trying to surrender or trying to run. Christian galleys are pursuing, capturing or sinking them. The water is full of debris and bodies. The smoke is so thick you can barely see 100 yards. There's one more element to this chaos that the Christian commanders didn't anticipate. The Christian slaves. Thousands of Christian captives have been chained to the rowing benches of Ottoman galleys for months or years. They've been beaten, starved, worked to exhaustion. And now their ships are being overrun by Christian soldiers. Some of these slaves are still in chains when Christian boarding parties arrive. Others manage to break free during the fighting. They grab weapons, dropped swords, abandoned spears, anything, and they turn on their captors. Ottoman ships lose all control. You've got the rowing crews, which are the propulsion system, actively fighting their own officers and soldiers. Ships that weren't even engaged with Christians start drifting because the rowers have risen up. It adds another layer of chaos to the Ottoman collapse. By the end of the battle, somewhere between 12 and 15,000 Christian slaves are freed. Some are so weak they can barely stand. Some have been rowing in chains for so long they don't even believe they're free at first. By 4 in the afternoon, it's over. The Ottoman fleet is destroyed. Only Uluç Ali's squadron escaped intact. Everything else is captured, sunk, burning, or beached. The Christians have won. The sun is setting over the Gulf of Patras, and the scene is apocalyptic. The water is choked with wreckage. Broken oars floating in clusters. Pieces of hull and deck. Torn sails drifting on the current. Bodies. So many bodies bobbing in the gentle swell. The smoke from burning ships still rises in dark columns against the orange sky. Some galleys are still on fire, flames spreading through the rigging, hulls slowly sinking. Don John's fleet anchors 5 miles north at the island of Pétalas. They've captured 170 Ottoman vessels. 170. Some are barely damaged and can be put into service immediately. Others are wrecks that will need extensive repair or will just be stripped for materials. But it's an enormous haul. The butcher's bill is heavy on both sides. For the Ottomans, it's a catastrophe. 30,000 men killed or wounded. 3,000 captured. And that's just the fighting casualties. There are probably thousands more who drowned or died trying to swim to shore. Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha is dead, beheaded on his own flagship. The sacred banner of the caliphs is in Christian hands. Most of the experienced ship captains are dead. Only 30 to 40 ships escaped, and those were only because Uluç Ali was smart and ruthless enough to run when he saw the battle was lost. The Christian losses are serious but manageable. 7,650 killed, 21,000 wounded. Somewhere between 10 and 15 galleys sunk. Many more ships damaged but repairable. Don John himself took a minor wound but stayed in command throughout. One of the wounded is a young Spanish soldier named Miguel de Cervantes. He's been hit 3 times. 2 wounds to the chest, 1 to his left hand that shatters the bones and leaves it permanently maimed. He'll spend months recovering, and he'll never have full use of that hand again. Decades later, he'll write about a battle-scarred soldier returning home, and that book, Don Quixote, will become one of the most famous works of literature in history. Right now, though, he's just another wounded soldier being treated on a crowded deck. The battlefield itself tells the story. Debris fields stretching for miles. The northern shore littered with beached ships and bodies. The water stained. As night falls, Christian crews are still working, securing captured ships, pulling their own damaged vessels to safety, searching for survivors among their own. The storm that Don John feared arrives right on schedule. Wind picks up. Rain starts. The fleet that's safely anchored at Pétalas rides it out. If they'd been scattered in pursuit of Uluç Ali, this storm would have been a disaster. Don John's decision to break off looks wiser with every hour. On those captured Ottoman ships, the freed Christian slaves are being given food and water. Some of them have been captive for years. They're emaciated, traumatized, scarred from the whip. The Venetians are especially attentive because many of these slaves are Venetian sailors or soldiers captured during the Cyprus campaign. Some are reunited with men they served with before being captured. Some have family in the fleet. Others are alone, everything they knew gone. There's no celebration yet. Everyone is too exhausted. The fighting lasted 5 hours, which doesn't sound like much until you consider what 5 hours of close combat means. Swinging swords, firing arquebuses, boarding ships, fighting in confined spaces. The physical and mental toll is immense. Men collapse on the decks of their ships and just sleep where they fall. The magnitude of what they've achieved hasn't really sunk in yet. They've destroyed the main Ottoman battle fleet. They've captured the sacred banner. They've freed thousands of slaves. They've proven that the seemingly invincible Turkish navy can be beaten decisively. But Cyprus is still lost. Famagusta is in Ottoman hands. Bragadin is still dead. The islands of Crete and Corfu are still vulnerable. And there are already arguments starting among the Allied commanders about what to do next. Venice wants to press east, try to retake lost territories while the Ottomans are reeling. Spain wants to secure North Africa, where Turkish corsairs are still raiding. The papal forces want to consolidate this victory and plan for next year's campaign. Don John knows that his fleet is battered, his supplies are low, and storm season is coming. Moving east toward Ottoman-controlled waters would be risky at best, suicidal at worst. Politics and logistics are already undermining the unity that won this battle. But none of that can diminish what happened today. The Ottoman fleet that has terrorized the Mediterranean for decades is gone. The myth of their invincibility is shattered. And 6 Venetian galleasses that Ottoman spies dismissed as just for show proved to be the decisive weapon that broke the Turkish formation in the opening minutes and set the stage for everything that followed. The last light fades from the sky. The fires on the wrecked ships burn lower. The wind continues to rise. And somewhere to the east, back at Lepanto, the Ottoman fortifications stand empty of the fleet that sailed from there just yesterday morning. News travels slowly in 1571, but when it travels, it explodes. A fast galley makes it to Rome on October 22nd, 15 days after the battle. Pope Pius V is informed during morning prayers. He stops the service immediately, leads the congregation to St. Peter's Basilica, and offers thanksgiving. Word spreads through the city within hours. Bells ring. People pour into the streets. This isn't just a naval victory. This is deliverance from a threat that has loomed over Christian Europe for generations. The news reaches King Philip II of Spain at his palace complex at El Escorial on October 31st. The message travelled 3,500 kilometres at an average of 150 kilometres per day, which is remarkably fast for the time. Philip is at prayer. It's All Souls' Day, and when he receives the news, he orders the choir to sing the Te Deum immediately. His chief minister declares it the greatest naval victory since Pharaoh's army drowned in the Red Sea. 2 months later, Philip's wife gives birth to a son and heir. The timing seems providential. Philip pardons prisoners across his kingdom and commissions the most famous painter of the age, Titian, to commemorate the victory. Across Christian Europe, the response is the same: jubilation, relief, disbelief that the Ottomans could actually be beaten this decisively. The psychological impact is enormous. For decades, Ottoman victories had seemed inevitable. They'd taken Constantinople, crushed Christian fleets repeatedly, conquered vast territories around the Mediterranean. They'd seemed unstoppable. Lepanto proved they weren't. But here's where things get complicated, because the strategic reality didn't quite match the emotional triumph. Cyprus was still lost. The battle was fought on October 7th, but Famagusta had already fallen on August 1st. There was never any realistic chance of retaking the island. Venice was devastated by the loss. Cyprus had been a major source of revenue and a critical strategic position. The fact that they'd helped win a glorious battle didn't change the fact that they'd lost a war. And the Holy League itself started fracturing almost immediately. Pope Pius V, who had worked so hard to create the alliance, died in 1572, less than a year after Lepanto. Without his driving force, the coalition lost cohesion. Venice and Spain went back to distrusting each other. Different powers had different strategic priorities. Don John wanted to press the advantage, but Philip II was worried about the Netherlands and France, and wasn't willing to commit resources to a major Mediterranean campaign. Meanwhile, the Ottomans demonstrated something that surprised everyone: resilience. Within 6 months, they'd rebuilt their fleet. By spring 1572, Ottoman shipyards in Istanbul and Gallipoli had produced 134 new galleys. With ships from other sources, they floated a fleet of about 250 vessels into the eastern Mediterranean. Now, this rebuilt fleet wasn't the same quality as what they'd lost. A lot of these ships were built from green wood, hastily constructed, with less experienced crews. But the fact that they could rebuild at all in that time frame was shocking. It showed that the Ottoman naval infrastructure was more robust than anyone had realized. Venice, exhausted and financially drained, made a separate peace with the Ottomans in March 1573. The terms were humiliating. Venice officially ceded Cyprus, handed over fortresses in Albania and Bosnia, increased the tribute they paid for the island of Zante, agreed to return all Ottoman prisoners, confined their fleet, and paid war reparations. The Grand Vizier Sokulu Mehmed Pasha supposedly told the Venetian ambassador, "In wresting Cyprus from you, we deprived you of an arm. In defeating our fleet, you only shaved our beard. An arm, when cut off, cannot grow again, but a shorn beard will grow all the better for the razor." He had a point. Venice had lost Cyprus permanently. The Ottomans had lost ships they could replace. Spain tried to capitalize on the victory by attacking North Africa. In 1574, Ottoman forces recaptured Tunis, which Spain had taken earlier. The Spanish expansion in North Africa was effectively stopped. So the Ottomans, despite the disaster at Lepanto, still achieved major strategic goals in the years immediately following. Does that mean Lepanto didn't matter? No, but its significance is more subtle than the celebrations suggested. The battle marked a shift in the balance of confidence. Christian naval forces had proven they could match and beat the Ottomans under the right circumstances. The Mediterranean wouldn't be an Ottoman lake. Spain and Venice could hold the western and central Mediterranean. The psychological shock of the victory resonated for decades. It also marked the end of an era in naval warfare. Lepanto was the last major battle fought almost entirely with galleys. The galleass, that Venetian innovation, demonstrated the power of heavy broadsides and sail-powered vessels. Within a few decades, the galley would become obsolete in favor of sailing ships with multiple gun decks. The Spanish Armada in 1588 would be all sailing ships. The future belonged to vessels that didn't need hundreds of rowers and could carry heavier armament. Technologically, Lepanto was a turning point. Politically, it confirmed the division of the Mediterranean. The eastern Mediterranean stayed under Ottoman control. They held Cyprus, the Aegean, the Levantine coast. The western Mediterranean stayed under Spanish and Italian control. That division would persist for centuries. The galleasses themselves, ironically, were never really used effectively again. They were too slow, too unwieldy, too difficult to deploy. They worked at Lepanto because the Ottomans didn't understand what they were facing, and because the battlefield was a relatively confined space where mobility mattered less. But as a ship type, they were a dead end. The principles they demonstrated, heavy artillery on a sailing vessel, became standard, but the specific design didn't survive. The human cost on both sides was staggering. 38,000 men dead in a single afternoon. Thousands more wounded. Families destroyed. Communities devastated. And for what? Venice still lost Cyprus. The Ottomans still controlled most of the eastern Mediterranean. Spain was still overstretched and heading toward bankruptcy. But those 15,000 freed slaves got to go home. That mattered to them and their families. And the Christian powers learned that they could win if they worked together, even if they immediately went back to not working together. Centuries later, in the Gulf of Patras, the water is calm again. Pleasure boats sail where 450 warships once clashed. The fortifications at Lepanto are ruins, tourist sites. The guns are silent. The tactics and weapons that decided the battle are obsolete, curiosities for historians. But on October 7th each year, bells still ring in Venice. They ring in Spanish churches. They ring across the Mediterranean, in places that were part of that fragile Holy League. Not for what was won, because in strategic terms not much was won, but for what was proven. Even the greatest empires can bleed. Even the most terrifying fleets can be destroyed. And sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is a weapon your enemy never saw coming. 6 galleasses, dismissed as merchant ships too slow to matter, firing 325 pounds of shot per salvo into a formation that wasn't prepared for that kind of firepower. The Ottomans never saw it coming, and by the time they understood what those ships could do, it was too late. So that's the story, my friends. And if you're still here, right now, still listening after all this, that means something touched your heart along the way, doesn't it? Here's what Lepanto really teaches us. It's not always about having the biggest army or the most resources. Sometimes it's about seeing what others dismiss. Those Ottoman spies looked at the galleasses and saw slow, useless merchant ships. The Venetians saw floating fortresses that could change everything. In your life, how many opportunities have you walked past because they didn't look impressive at first glance? How many people have underestimated you because you didn't fit their idea of what success should look like? And here's the deeper truth. The Christians won the battle, but lost Cyprus anyway. Venice still had to surrender. Sometimes you fight your hardest, give everything you have, and the outcome still isn't what you hoped for. But those 15,000 freed slaves, they got to go home. That mattered. Your efforts matter, even when the big victory doesn't come. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." The Christians couldn't control whether Venice kept Cyprus, but they could control how they fought that day. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think differently about your own battles, do me a favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep exploring these moments together. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding ourselves. See you in the next one.